uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest. Conversation number 1, 2, the uncomfortable conversation. Hey y'all, it's me. I am back with part 2. Hey y'all. As promised, I am back with part 2 to what I am hoping won't be more than a 6-part conversation, uncomfortable conversation. And again, as promised, this is part 2. Last week I posted a prelude. This time I do not have professional production, so please bear with me. As this is not an easy conversation to have, I am super unfiltered, which is how I live my life. And I am committed to this though, because it's a conversation that we should have been having publicly. I should have done this years and years ago. Regret not doing it, but here I am nonetheless. So again, this is part 2, and just as I did the first time, I am going to start with a trigger warning, right? Because I understand that I am talking about things that are very sensitive in nature, topics that we don't talk about daily. In my humble opinion, we don't talk about them enough, which is, in my belief, part of the problem. Like, it's one of the reasons that we deal with this so much, and sometimes we're hesitant to have these conversations because they're uncomfortable, because they come with a lot of shame and guilt and so forth and so on. So I'm going to begin with a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about topics such as rape, child molestation, child sex assault. I don't know if I said rape yet. And a plethora of other things that may make you uncomfortable, may even cause some post-traumatic stress. So I encourage you to stop watching if you are uncomfortable with any of the topics that I just mentioned, or other topics that may make you very uncomfortable. I encourage you not to continue watching it. And so I will give you a few minutes to turn me off, or in some cases, if you want to hear what I got to say, turn me all the way up, because that's the season I'm in right now. If I had to describe my life right now, it would be turn me up. It would be, what's that saying, standing on business? Yeah, that would be me in this season. So, okay, I've given them enough time to turn me off, or again, turn me up. So what I've decided to do is I broke it down into 6 parts, because it's so hard, because this is a 17-year, this year is 17 years, makes 17 years. So that we've been dealing with this, and it's been ongoing because different things have come out over the years. And as a result, I've had to deal with so many things, so much trauma, me and my children. And again, it's been an ongoing thing. So it's so hard to capture everything in one conversation in a day. So I've decided to break it down into 6 or 7 different parts, and hopefully it'll be an ongoing conversation. Not the really traumatic parts, but how we overcome, how we live with, how we go through, how we manage, how we cope, all of those things. And these are not the only things that I'll be talking about on the Uncomfortable Conversation, because I realize I've been through so much as a result of the foundation, the fractured foundation that I have had to experience. I've dealt with so many other things, and I've really navigated a life filled with so much that I've learned so much. And I am a wealth of knowledge. I am a great resource for people, even if it's just a conversation to help people navigate different circumstances. I've been through so much, and a lot of it really does stem from the things that I've had to deal with and overcome. So as I broke it down into 6 different parts, week number 1 was a prelude to like an overall of what it is I'll be discussing. the thing that really has fractured my family, that has caused me and my children so much trauma. I put out that video to just kind of give you all an overview. And so this is week number 2, and I am starting with the beginning, like where it all began. What I will say is that I honestly believe, it is my belief, I am not trying to push my beliefs on anybody, but this is just my belief. I believe that things like molestation, things that become generational curses in families, starts with an agreement. And it can be verbal or nonverbal. It can be a verbal agreement that 2 relatives decide they're going to commit incest, and then it starts there, and it's an accepted behavior, and it just continues on from generation to generation until somebody stop it, somebody break it, or it just continues to go on and plagues their family. Then I believe there's that unspoken agreement where it happens and families sweep it under the rug. People know about it, even if it's just those 2 people, or, you know, a couple people might know about it, and we all just gonna have little sidebar conversations. It's talked about here and there, but it's never dealt with. There's never healing that comes from it. There's never really clarity. There's just a speculation and accusation, and, you know, we just navigate life and pretend, again, sweeping it under the rug, pretending it never happened, right? I believe that there is an agreement that goes forward with most generational curses, if not all of them. And in my situation, like, I was determined to not be a part of that, which is why, again, I posted that video years ago, 2 years ago, like, I'm having a grandbaby. It's going to stop here. I'm not going to let it hit another generation, not on my watch. The same way that there was an agreement somewhere in my bloodline that this was going to go forward, I am breaking that agreement because I'm not in agreement with it, never been in agreement with it, and it ain't going to continue to plague my family. If it's going to hit, like, it's going to have to, like, I'm going to war, is how I felt when my daughter got pregnant with my grandson. So, a little about me, as you guys may or may not know, I'm in my 40s. I ain't gonna tell my age because sis look good for her age. No, seriously, so I'm in my 40s. When I was 11 years old, well, first of all, I come from a pretty good family. I absolutely love my mother. And I posted a video last week because I had a lot of people reach into me. And of course, people can give you their opinions, and I'm open to those because, I mean, why else do we have conversations? It should be a 2-way street or 10-way. However many people want to comment, they're going to comment. People are going to ask questions because they're naturally going to be curious. Let me put this out there. I absolutely, positively love my mother without a shadow of a doubt. I love my mother. I respect my mom. I love serving my mom. My children love serving my mom. And regardless of what you hear, I encourage you not to look at my mother in a negative light, right? Regardless of what you hear, and it's going to be a lot over these next 6 weeks, I encourage you to listen with an open mind, a pure heart, and understanding that we are all human beings and we all get to make a conscious decision that we're going to participate or not participate in things that happen to us, right? So anyway, so I love my mom. I was raised and loved well by my mom, my stepdad. I've had a couple men stand in the gaps, and my natural father has been in and out of my life my whole life. So when I was 11 years old, I was visiting an aunt. I talk about it in my book, Hide Me From Me. And that's not a plug. It's really, my book is really a good book. It's a memoir. So I talk about this incident where I was 11 years old. I was visiting with my aunt. And while I was visiting with my aunt, I was molested by, and this is an aunt. She's not an aunt by blood relation. She's an aunt, you know how you have family members that are connected either through marriage, or your mama got a girlfriend, a good girlfriend, a good Judy, who becomes your aunt because that's how elders are. You know, that's how it was back in the day. Like some of my good sister friends became my kids' aunts, right? So I had this aunt. I was visiting. I was at her house during the summer, and it was like June-ish, and I was asleep. And this man, a grown man, he was in his, I'm gonna say 20s, late 20s. He comes in the room, and I was pretending that I was asleep when he came in because I heard him come in. And he sat on the bed next to me, and I talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to be very detailed. So again, if you think you're going to have some PTSD, I encourage you, some post-traumatic stress, I encourage you not to listen any further, because I may get a little graphic, and I'm going to try not to be too graphic, but I'm going to be very honest. So he comes in the bedroom, and it was a few of us in the bedroom, and the other kids were asleep, but I just could not fall asleep. I just didn't feel comfortable, right? Something was just, I felt off that night. So I'm sitting there trying to fall asleep, and so when I saw the light come in and I heard the door open, I closed my eyes and I was pretending I was asleep. So he sits down on the bed next to me, and he was like, "Hey, are you awake?" And I didn't move or say anything, and I just lay there in silence. He was like, "Are you awake?" And I just refused to answer this man. He was already weirding me out. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. It was beer breath. It was so disgusting. I hate beer because of that to this day. Okay, so he keeps asking me, am I awake? And I'm ignoring him. So he takes my pajama pants and he like lifts them up. And at this point in my mind, I'm like, what do I do? I'm 11. I'm trying to process what's happening, right? And I'm gonna try to do this without crying, because I've really I've just been through so much. It's just been so hard. It's a little harder today to tell this than it would have been for me prior to now, because I actually saw him for the second time since I was 11 years old recently. And it was hard, seeing him. But I had that I wish a nigga would speak to me when I saw him, right? It was going to be the day I lit him up. So anyway, so he lifts my pajama pants up and he slides his hand in my underwear and he begins to rub my vagina. He just kept talking to me while he was doing it, and I was just so scared. He was at it for like, it felt like eternity, like it was never going to end. And I remember thinking to myself, like, my body was naturally responding to what was happening. I was 11. At the time, I had never masturbated. I had never been introduced to any sexual activity or behavior. I wasn't aroused when I washed my own wahina. Like, I had never dealt with anything like this. So it was so uncomfortable. And then now, at my adult age, I know that what I experienced was so wrong, but I could not help how it felt. And so my body, again, naturally responded. Now that I'm at the age I am, I can be, it's so disgusting, I don't even want to say it. Like, I thought that I could, but, you just can't. So he fondled me until I came. Now that I know that that's what it is at this age, back then I didn't know what it was, right? So he stimulated me until that happened. And then he just kept talking to me. And I don't know what else he was doing, because I've refused to open my eyes. I don't know if I don't know what else he did, but he just kept going. And I just thought it was never going to end. I was so confused, and just I just did not know what to do. So he finally stopped, and God, I didn't know God then, but I was just so excited that he stopped, because I was so mad. He left out of the room, and I got up and I woke my cousin up. And I asked my cousin to call my mother, and I told her exactly what happened. She in turn called my mother, and my mother and them came and got me. Now, my mother never asked me what exactly, he did to me. I didn't get counseling, which is something I made sure I did for my daughter. I think that back then, they didn't know how to deal with stuff like that. You know, they didn't know how to respond to it. They could have beat them up, and that would have been, they would have felt like they were, you know, vindicated in some way. But I just didn't go back over my aunt's house anymore to spend the night. I went over there. Remember going over there a couple times with my mom, but after that, like, I never really spent the night out anywhere after that. Like, I just didn't. Aside from the fact I didn't feel comfortable. My mother already didn't let us go many places because she just didn't. My mother was not that parent. Like, people would come to our house. Everybody wanted to be at my house, but we would never really spend the night at anybody else's house. So after that, I never really spent the night out anymore at anybody's house. And again, we never talked about what happened after that. But when that happened to me, I promised myself when I became a mother that I was not going to adopt there were two things that my mama used to say that drove me crazy, and that I said I would never, one of them that I would never say or teach my children. One was when my mother would always say, because I said so. I just didn't like it. Drove me crazy. The other thing is, what goes on in this house stays in this house. Absolute no. That's a hard no for me. That's one thing I told my mother. Told my children, myself, that I would never say to my children even when I decided to have kids. And I didn't. I refused to. Do you hear me? I told my kids, when I started having kids and my children were old enough to understand, I would tell them, if anybody ever touches you, you tell everybody that's going to listen. Even if it's me that touch you, if you feel like I touch you in an inappropriate way, or your dad's, you tell everybody that's going to listen. You sing like a hummingbird, right? I told my kids that because I was not playing around. I wanted my kids to tell. I never wanted them to hold that. And I think that was a problem for me. That what goes on in the house, stay in this house. No, it don't. You tell, especially if it's something that hurts you, brings any hurt, harm, or danger to you. You tell whoever gonna listen. So I did. I told my kids that, right? I'm sorry, I was getting parched. And I'm glad that I did. So bear with me, please. Because again, I want to do this without getting too emotional. Because it's so hard. So, I made the choice to have multiple children. And at the time, I had 3 children. And my mother was keeping one of them. The other 2, I would take to my mother-in-law's for daycare. And I call her my mother-in-law. I wasn't married to her son, but I had children by him. So she was keeping my 2 younger children, and my mom was keeping my 4-year-old at the time. So this was in 2007. I was a mom of 3. They were 4, 2, and 1. So my daughter was 4. I was at work. And when I got home, my mother told me that my daughter had come to her and told her that my nephew touched her. He molested her. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have a choice because my ex-husband wasn't helping me, because my children's father wasn't helping me. I had no choice but to Sorry, I had to take a little break. So, because I promised myself that I really was going to try and do this without crying and stuff. You know, and I'm working hard because this is just a lot. Like, I just can't tell you guys how much stress and trauma I've had to deal with. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because I really want to save somebody from going through what I've been through. I've been through a lot in my life, but this has been the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. Because it's come with so much. And over the next, 5 weeks, the things that I share, y'all gonna be looking at me like, did you really go through that stuff? I'm so proud of myself that I've been able to still love people. I'm so proud of myself that I've still been able to show up for family. I'm so proud of myself as a mom that I didn't let what I went through change me, that I didn't let it change my heart. You know, I heard a reel the other day, and it said, one day you're going to have to feed your enemies. One day you're going to have to go to the hospital with your enemies. One day you're going to be presented with, deciding whether or not you're going to help your enemies or, want the same thing that happened to you to happen to them. And what happened to me and my children, I would never want to happen to anybody else. And there are times when I sit back and I think to myself, how was my family okay with this? How did my family miss the mark with this one, right? So I'm sorry I had to take a break because I thought I'd be able to get myself together, and I will, just bear with me. So I stopped off with, I came home and my mother told me that my 4-year-old told her that she was touched inappropriately. And what I didn't share in the prelude is that I said my daughter was molested by my nephew. And I've been battling with whether or not to talk about this part. But my daughter wasn't molested by one of my nephews. She was molested by 2, right? In the same day. And that in itself, for any 4-year-old, was too much. As a mother, my heart sank because my biggest fear was always that somebody was going to do to my children what was done to me at 11. And so it was always my prayer that God didn't let that happen. When I first gave birth to my first child, I would talk to her and I would pray over her. Then I gave birth to my second child. And as the years went on, I gave birth to my third child. And I was just I'm so happy that my kids will never have to experience what I had to experience as a child at 11. And then that day when I came home, that excitement that my kids had not been violated was stripped from me. Not only was my child molested by 1, but she was molested by 2 of my nephews. Again, in the same day. So, one of them admitted it and gave my mother an explanation as to why he did it. And the other one denied it. The one that denied it was 12 years older than my daughter, which means he was 16 at the time. I always believed my daughter. Always. I stood on 10. I stood on business. I would not back down. My mom didn't believe it. And here's the reality. Nobody wants to believe that stuff like this happened in their household, on their watch, They don't want to believe that people, especially people they love, are capable of things like this. But the sad reality is it's happening right now. It happens every day. It happens under our roof. It happens while you're in the next room. And sometimes, like, you just never know. I tried to be as vigilant as possible with my kids. And while, you know, my mom didn't want to believe it, I did. Why would my 4-year-old make up something like that? Like, who would just make up that something like that happened to them? You know, so again, she was never believed. And when it happened, I immediately pulled my children from daycare at my mom's. And I had to sit down and recreate a timeline. When I talked to my psychiatrist and my clinical psychologist, and I decided that I was going to go forward with this, the one thing that I was encouraged to do was to sit down and write out a timeline, because people will dispute things and we all have our own recollection of things. But I went back. And one of the reasons when I pulled my children, my daughter, I went on ahead and took my other children eventually from my mother-in-law's too. And I had to pull out my daughter's preschool graduation. I put her in a playground. I said a playground, a daycare called The Playground. It was so cool. And, you know, because she was 4, she wasn't in school at the time because she couldn't go to school. I made too much. She couldn't get into pre-K and pre-K 4 because I made too much money at the time. And so I then put her in a daycare center. So she graduated at the age of 4, started school, you know, and I just went forward with life. We never had conversations really after that because he always denied it. And everybody always believed that my daughter was lying, right? So I always believed it again. And I just kept a close watch on my kids. After that, I just really, I was already crazy as a mother, and people used to like say that I was crazy, but now you understand why. You have a better understanding now, and I don't have any regrets about how crazy I was about my children. Even now, I don't have any regrets about how crazy I am when it comes to my kids and other people's kids. What I did not understand for the life of me, and I still don't understand, is why. Why? I was always the person to protect not just my kids, but other people's kids too. And so I didn't understand. I just don't understand why God allowed it to happen to my child at such an innocent age. She was stripped of her innocence. She was stripped of innocence. Like at 4, that's a lot, right? So that happened at the age of 4. Put her in daycare. She ended up graduating from daycare. Eventually, she ended up going to school because she ended up in kindergarten. And eventually, I took them back to my mom. Well, at this time, because I took a $50,000, you hear that? Yes, $50,000 pay cut, nearly a $50,000 pay cut. It was like maybe 40,000, 45, something like that. I took a huge pay cut at work because I was a contractor. And when I took this pay cut at work, I had to put my kids back, send them back to my mama's. And they went a couple other places. My aunt kept them, and they had gone to another home daycare because I exhausted, you know, other resources before I had to take them back to my mom's, right? Ended up taking them back to my mother's. And again, I just always operated as if I believed my daughter, regardless of what anybody else said. Because this is going to be 6 parts, that was just a lot. A preview to the next part, which will probably be the heaviest part for me because it's the bulk of what happened next and why life started to fall apart behind the scenes for me, even when people did not know what I was dealing with. And that was, it went so far as to, like, again, I had said in the prelude that I had been accused of molesting my own kids. And it's because, so a preview to next week. And I know it was hard for me to make it through what happened to my daughter at the age of 4. So it's going to be even harder next week to talk about how that same nephew who was 16 when my daughter was 4 was then 19 when my daughter was 7, and he struck again. He was 19 when my daughter was 7, and from about 7 to 9, he molested her again while she was at my mother's house for before and after care for school. After school, my mother was keeping them, and again, he struck again. And I didn't find out that he did that until 2021. But it explains so much that happened, you know. So, again, because it was hard for me to make it through this, like what happened to my baby, next week gonna be even harder. I might have to have some more support, somebody who knows exactly what went on, because I'm even going to talk about things that are really going to piss some people off in my family. It may make them very mad, and it's gonna have to. It's time for it to break, because I've been through hell, y'all. Like I've been through so much just because of that one thing. What people don't understand, and I'm really trying to get to a place where I'm not always going back to the start, but it's the foundation. And because that foundation is fractured and nobody has fixed it, we haven't really dealt with it as a family, as one, because it involves so many people, because we've never dealt with it. Like, it has continued to, like, it's compounded trauma, it's compounded stress. And until we deal with it, we're going to keep dealing with it. But because I've decided, that generational curse started with me, in my opinion, with what that non-relative of a cousin did to me. Like, it happened to my kids. And then, so since it started with me, I'm gonna end it. Basically, I'm gonna end it, because again, my kids weren't the only kids that were affected by this predatory behavior. You know, unfortunately, like I said earlier, it happens so often that we don't want to think about it, deal with it, but, you know, we do. You know what? I thought I couldn't get through it, but I'm gonna try. And if it becomes too much, then I'll just cut the video short, because I do want to keep these under 30 minutes anyway. But I'm gonna try and go forward. I'm gonna try and do this now while, you know, oh God, I'm sorry. So, took my kids back to my mother's, right? She was, oh, I feel sick. Hold on, y'all.